So Guild Wars 2 PvP is getting closer to being in a balanced state, but there are some very clear perpetrators of this. And I'm going to try to go over what balance changes I would like to see for PvP in 2019 to kind of increase the interactivity and lower the power creep that we'll see on these classes. So I'll just go through all the classes and kind of just say what I think is the issue with them and then propose a change for them. And these are all kind of going to be about, because right now the issue is every class pretty much is power creep, right? And this has a lot to do with sustain and damage, not just damage, right? Because a lot of classes can get that much damage because they have this sustain as well, right? Because if you have sustain, you can sacrifice some of your sustain to get damage, right? So removing some of the sustain results in having to lose some damage to get that sustain back by build choices. So that's another way of balancing a class sometimes, you know, like if something has really good sustain, then it doesn't need to worry about building more sustain. So that's kind of another thing that I'm going for here is some classes have high damage, but we're going to be reducing their survivability in order to reduce their damage in a way. Or, you know, they can just decide to not, you know, sacrifice their damage, and then they'll be easier to kill, which will be balancing them as well. So let's start off with Thief. Thief is the class that I have the most experience with, so I'll probably have better suggestions there. So first of all, we're going to be looking at Sword Dagger and Dagger Pistol. So Sword Dagger is probably the meta build right now for sure, because the meta is very boon heavy. Sword Dagger steals boons, therefore it is meta. So I think that that's good, that, you know, there's a build that steals boons and it has a place, and that place is now. But I think that one huge issue that will be needing to be changed in all metas is the range of the Sword 2 Infiltrator's strike. And the reason for this is because if you are able to enter and exit fights from basically almost anywhere in the vicinity, you're basically untouchable unless you get CC'd somehow. I mean, you have stun break, so you can just stun break and then Sword 2 back, right? So it's really hard to interact with a thief who has their Sword 2 return spot placed very intelligently. So I would say to reduce the Sword 2 range to 900 instead of 1200 would allow a lot more counterplay, because thieves who have really good positioning on their Sword 2 will have to make harder choices where to put it, and sometimes they won't be able to put it in such good spots, so they'll be in riskier positioning and they'll get punished if they stay in fights too long, right? So they'll have to rotate better. They'll be able to rotate less, obviously, because Sword 2 is lower range, but they'll have to be more intelligent, and that's always a good thing, is creating more skill rather than uninteractivity. For Dagger Pistol, I would say that it's on the verge of being viable. It's just not the meta for Dagger Pistol. So I wouldn't really buff Dagger Pistol because we don't want to power creep here. Though one change that I think that would be good is adding vulnerability to the Dagger Auto 1 skill. It's called Double Strike. So if you add one vulnerability on each strike, that would actually be a really good change for Dagger Pistol Thief, because it would allow you to get vulnerability first of all, which is a really good cover condi, and it would allow you to, first of all, because Sword Dagger has access to vulnerability whereas Dagger Pistol doesn't. So adding vulnerability is really good because it helps your team focus a target, which is really the role of Thief, is to, you know, focus targets and secure kills for your team. So Vuln is really good, and not having Vuln is really bad. So I think that it fits the thief playstyle very well, and is also not like a high power creep there, because it's just adding vuln. So you're not adding like, oh, make this skill do a lot more damage. No, it's adding vuln, which makes all other skills do damage. But yeah, it's only one vuln per strike, so it's not really that big of a deal. And then as for Dagger Storm, that's a skill that has been power creeped very heavily, and while I disagreed with them making it this strong, if they really want to keep, if ANET wants to keep Dagger Storm this strong, then I would suggest removing Dagger Storm from the trick category, which means that improvisation and trickster won't affect it anymore. And well, the trickster doesn't really matter. I mean, that's kind of, that feels kind of bad to remove it from trickster synergy, but I think it's worth it to remove it from the improvisation line, giving it the chance to instantly recharge it, because how Dagger Storm is actually used nowadays is you just spam it basically off cooldown, because every time you steal, you have a chance to recharge it, and you want to use it as much as possible because it's so strong. But that kind of makes it spammy and not really intelligent to use, because there are very good times to use Dagger Storm and very bad times to use Dagger Storm. But if you want to use Dagger Storm before you steal, you're going to be using it at bad times. So it's kind of like, it doesn't really feel good to use Dagger Storm right now. But if you're not given that incentive to spam it and use it at the right time, it's going to feel a lot better to when you do get a good one off, and it's also going to feel a lot less terrible when an enemy thief gets a lucky improv and then they double Dagger Storm or even triple Dagger Storm, right? So it's really not an interactive skill, but since it's such a high cooldown and it's only like 4 seconds, it's a high impact skill that is sort of balanced by its cooldown. So making sure that cooldown is there and not, getting it back instantly from improv steals is pretty important. So moving on to Deadeye, I would remove stealth on dodge. Period. Do nothing else to Deadeye. I think that they have plenty of stealth options already. They have that one functionality where whenever you use a stolen ability, when you have max malice, you will go into stealth. And I think if thieves want to get some of the stealth that they lose from this change, they can just go with the cantrip trait, which gives them a stolen ability whenever they... it gives them a random one whenever they use a cantrip. And if, an intelligent Deadeye will be able to juggle their cantrips and get stealth that way by... And this will also prevent them from getting too much stealth early on in the fight, right? Because they can if they're using the cantrip trait, or in general, they can really only get stealth from having max malice, which means they need to invest into a fight a little bit before they can get their stealth. So, I mean, they would have to use either like dagger pistol or the rifle kneel 4 and standing 4 to get stealth, which are combos, and they're they cost a lot to do, whereas dodging is very low investment and very easy to do, so it's not very interactive. But to use up a resource and to have to time or kind of like schedule your cooldowns is much more interactive, and I think that would be a lot better for the health of the Deadeye class, and it would certainly remove a lot of the hate for the class as well, which I think is important. So let's move on to Ranger. Ranger is probably one of the strongest classes in the game right now in PvP because of how power crept it's been. Soul Beast is without a doubt meta side noter, best 1v1er build. Maybe not best side noter, but best 1v1er, and that means that it has the most winning matchups in the game. And I don't think it has any losing matchups, does it? Maybe like some sort of Condi build. Anyways, the issue with Soul Beast is Axe is very power crept. The Axe 3 skill is it's the bonus the base damage is way too high. That's been power crept too much, and it has this mechanic where the next time your pet hits the target, it'll give like 10 seconds of weakness after you use your Axe 3, and that can't be avoided. So what that means is, say you use Axe 3 and then the pet comes up to you and you dodge the pet, and then the pet hits you right after, it'll give you the weakness. If you dodge the next 5 attacks of the pet, it'll still give you weakness. So there needs to be some way to not get that weakness on you. Whereas, I mean, obviously just not getting hit by the pet is an option, but still, the pet's gonna pretty much hit you no matter what. Especially if it's like a smoke scale. It's gonna have its little teleport attack. So you're gonna get hit, and you're gonna get 10 seconds of weakness, and it's just gonna be really not fun to play against. I would say remove plasma from the pig. Just remove it. I mean, it's just not necessary to have that many boons, you know? It's just not. It's too many. Another one is the healing skill of rangers, the trait that gives them muddy terrain. This is not really fun to play against either. It just immobes you, cripples you, slows you. By the way, slow is a really bad condition. Remove that from the game. It's just not fun to use. It's not fun to play against. Just remove slow from the game, please. But I would say to increase the cooldown of the muddy terrain trait for rangers heal, so that instead of using getting it every time you use your heal, you would get it maybe like every other time you heal. And this would, because a lot of rangers just use their heal off cooldown, and even if they're like full health, they'll use it just to get the slow. I don't think that that's very interesting gameplay or very skillful to just use your heal off cooldown, just because it creates an effect that's so strong that you don't even use your heal skill for a heal. And especially I would increase the cast time of Troll Ungent, because it's one of the ways to counter a ranger is to prevent them from landing their heal skill, and it's such a fast cast time that it's really impossible to interrupt it, especially when they have so much access to quickness. So maybe like a half-second longer cooldown or cast time on Troll Ungent, and maybe probably nerf Sikkim. I would nerf Sikkim because right now you have like the Soul Boons build, which I'm already saying should be nerfed. So a lot of people are gonna swap to just like a full burst Sikkim if Soul Boons becomes not viable, which I think it would still be good with these changes. And having 40% extra damage, and it's not even to your target. Sikkim increases the damage that you do, period, because you merge with your pet, and your pet just has more damage. I would say nerf Sikkim to like 20%, to be honest. There's no reason that people should be able to one-shot that fast with a ranged build that it's just insane. Nerf Sikkim, please. It's not fun to play against, and it's not very skillful to use, and it's not even really that viable, to be honest, in higher tier play. So yeah, I would say a hybrid Soul Beast build. Those will shine a little better now, and those are the more skillful and more interactive builds to play against and as anyway. So I would think that like sort of like bursty but sort of 1v1 oriented Soul Beasts are where we kind of want Soul Beasts to be. You know, we want Ranger to be slippery but not unkillable. And we want them to have damage, but not to be one-shotting things, right? We want them to be sort of like a skirmishing class. So, yeah, I think that's it for Ranger. Let's move on to Engineer. So Hollowsmith is pretty strong. I would say it's the strongest class in the game. You have Ranger is the strongest 1v1er, but Engineer is strong in 1v1s and in every other situation you can think of, except maybe being against like Condi Scourge, right? That's maybe the only situation. So one of the reasons for this is because they have damage, CC, sustain, self-peel, and team support with their heal turret. So they basically do everything. So they're good in every situation. They have mobility, by the way. It's just, they have range damage, they have melee damage, they have huge cleave, like they just have everything. And they have perma quickness. So that's a huge issue, because one of the things that actually balanced Hollow was that it has very clear animations. But when you have quickness, you can't really react to their animations, because they come in so quickly in succession that even if you deal with one, the next one's already coming at you, right? So I would reduce the amount of quickness that they get from whichever elixir that they get that from by enough that it's, you know, people don't want to play it anymore, basically. I don't think that quickness should be a thing on Hollow. They're just so heavy on damage that giving them quickness makes them into like a heavy DPS class that also can 1v1. I think if they're going to be a 1v1 style class that can also team fight, they shouldn't be like a hyper carry. And then another issue that I would say is Elixir S. Having double Elixir S just is not fun to play against, and it's not even like that good. It just kind of stalls and stuns you, and then it kind of is broken for stomps and reses. I would say that one Elixir S is fine, you know, like to prevent you from getting instantly bursted, but that would have to be, I would say having the active Elixir S would be better, and make the passive Elixir S harder to obtain. So maybe increase the cooldown, but I would say that just increasing the cooldown is not good. That's lazy. I would change the passive Elixir S to be a Grandmaster trait, so that it competes with I'm not even sure what they use in alchemy, but yeah, I would just make it more difficult choice to pick that. So if they want Elixir S 2 times, they have to sacrifice something else, which makes them worse overall. And you know, that trades the uninteractivity for, you know, the being able to go about your business because they're less effective. So another issue with Hollow is its sustain is very high, but also requires not much to get it. So on top of healing turret scaling very well with all of the leaps and stuff that Hollows have, heat therapy, which is the trait that when they leave or they lose heat, they gain health per second, and whenever they have that trait that reduces heat when they dodge. So this is kind of similar to Adrenal Health on Warrior, but Adrenal Health on Warrior was nerfed so that they actually have to land their burst skills to actually get it. And obviously full counter is kind of easier to land, but engineers don't really need to do anything to get their heat therapy, which gives them basically another healing signet, and they already have a heal skill that's really good. So their sustain is really high, but the only like setback to it is that they have to not overheat to get it, right? And that risk isn't really that difficult to reach, you know, because the meta is the dodge trait, right? So it's really easy to prevent yourself from overheating if you just dodge, right? Just dodge. And I think that if they made Now, I'm not sure exactly what they'll do, but if they made heat therapy more, somehow it would be more difficult to obtain it than just going into hollow form and just spamming all your skills, then leaving, and then entering it in and then leaving, because it's just too easy to do that, and there's no punish for it. So I would say either reduce heat therapy's effectiveness or make it harder to obtain, and that'll make hollow a lot less effective in resustaining, not necessarily their survivability, but their sustain. So warrior is actually kind of broken in how it works with the strength build. It has a lot of dodges and it has a lot of damage, and it plays very uninteractively in that way because the times that it is vulnerable are very few, and in those times it's doing massive damage. But I don't really think that this is that big of an issue, because if warrior isn't broken, it's just not viable. That's kind of how warrior works. It's just the best at defense and it's the best at offense. It's kind of just like a fighter class, right? So I wouldn't make too many changes to warrior other than increasing the cooldown of rampage. It's just not. It doesn't need to be a low cooldown and so spammy, especially because the meta build uses strength with the physical trait, which allows you to rampage basically every fight. You should definitely have to use rampage at a really good time when you know that you're going to get value off of it, and not just spam it off cooldown, because it's really not fun to play against, and it's just kind of broken in a way. So you should have to use it at the right time to get that value from that high present skill, and not just basically just use it whenever. And yeah, maybe that's all that really needs to be done. I would think that if they just made the shift back to like a defense discipline build, I think people enjoyed that meta of warrior a lot better than the strength one now, where it's just like perma dodge. Shake it off is, if anything gets nerfed other than rampage, I would say maybe shake it off. It seems a little bit strong, but otherwise it seems good. Warrior isn't really that abusive. It's pretty strong, but it's supposed to be. Revenant is a kind of in a weird place. It's very good when it has support, and very, very bad when it doesn't have any support. So giving it less damage would be an issue, and giving it more survivability would also be an issue. So I would just leave Revenant where it is right now, for now, and just see where the meta goes from there. Maybe if anything, I would remove the quickness from the port-in ability, because it's just too much, it's too much aggressive potential put on one ability. I would say maybe force them to use, well, they removed quickness from impossible odds, so maybe require them to use impossible odds to get the quickness again, so that they have to use up more energy to get that combination of aggressive porting in and then quickness at the same time, and that'll kind of prevent people from porting in using all their offhand sword abilities and then just doing insane bursts in a small amount of time. Yeah, that's about it for Revenant. Guardian. So there's two specs of Guardian that I would like to see in the meta. There's the core DPS Radiance Guardian and the Bunker Guardian. Right now, the core build is kind of weak. I would say that the main issue with it is it doesn't have enough sustain, so it's kind of like it's not like a 1v1 class because it doesn't have sustain, though it does have decent Connie cleanse, so it's actually kind of a good matchup versus Mesmer somewhat. And it has issues with chasing targets that have sustain themselves. So, and this is mainly because it can't it can't stick to its targets. So I would say I would remove a little bit of the damage of the focus 4 because that seems kind of uninteractive when it is good. Like you just sit there with the focus 4 on you and you just die or something like that. But if instead it gave like a cripple or a chill or a mob and then lost a little bit of damage, that would feel a lot better for Guardians because it would allow them to set up their bursts better, and it would also be it kind of fits the theme of Ray of Judgment too, right? Because it puts this like this like beam of light on the target, so it's kind of like, hey, hit this target, it's you know, it's being CC'd. Like it has this role in team fights that allows you to like focus targets sort of, whereas normally it would just be doing damage. So I would say, yeah, that's all that Core Guardian really needs, is a little bit more ability to peel, or it doesn't really have good self peel, but if you run Greatsword, it's better. But yeah, just sticking to its targets is probably something that it needs to be a little better. And Bunker Firebrand it's in a weird spot because it's sometimes really good and then sometimes really bad, depending on your team's comp or the enemy team's comp, right? If they have a lot of damage, you sometimes get bursted down too fast if you don't have enough counter pressure. And if your team doesn't have enough damage, then you feel kind of useless, that you're supporting nothing or something, or there's no team fights. So I think that there are a lot of setbacks to Firebrand right now, and that kind of balances the insane sustain that it can provide. However, I think that the Signet Res utility, Signet of Mercy, needs to have an increased cast time and an increased cooldown, because it prevents too many kills that you should be proactively preventing with merciful intervention and stuff like that. You should be skillfully preventing those kills by protecting them, rather than just saying, oh, just let him die, I'll just Signet him, and then, you know, we'll just, you know, get rewarded for being reactive rather than proactive, which a support should be trying to be proactive, not reactive, in my opinion. So yeah, moving on to Necro. Blood Magic, it's really not fun to play against Blood Magic, because if someone goes down on the enemy team, they have too much res potential. I know it's been nerfed, but say if you're in a situation where you're like 1v1ing someone and the enemy Necro, who's blood, comes in and pluses you, no matter how hard you're winning, you can never ever stomp that other player, because the Necro will just press F. Even if you stomp, it'll be too fast. Even if you cleave, they'll have too much counter pressure for you to do that, and they'll just keep rezzing. So maybe if you're like a Necro yourself, then maybe you have enough cleave, but then why would you be 1v1ing? So it's just like, it's so unnecessarily powerful in that situation. And in team fights, it's also kind of not that great because the enemy team has enough cleave. But also at the same time, if you have a Firebrand and a Blood Necro, then it's a little bit abusive. So I would say just nerf Blood Res again. I would say just nerf it, yeah. I mean, it's really not that fun to play as or against. It's nice to have the ability to support your allies, but you should have to maybe play a little more into it, or not get rewarded for only pressing one button, right? You just press F, that's all you do, and sometimes transfuse. And then, okay, so there's Reaper, and then there's Condi Scourge. There's Power Reaper, and I think that Power Reaper has a little bit too much damage. It's been power creeped over time, and one of the issues is the axe skills, which have been really buffed over time. So I would say that nerfing Axe 2, the one that does insane damage based on how much vuln the enemy has, I would say definitely reduce the scaling of that, so it stays a little bit lower on the scale, or you increase the cooldown so it's not as spammy, because a lot of necros, I mean, this is the proper play to do, is to just spam Axe 2 because it's good always, pretty much. And also there's like a bug on Axe 2 where if they evade some of the attack, then they don't evade the other half, it'll still miss because of like some bug. If we just reduce the damage on Axe 2 or increase the cooldown and then fix that bug, that would be pretty nice. On Condi Scourge, I would say it's pretty okay. Maybe reduce the duration of burns, because you can get a lot of burns on Scourge, and it's not the only condition that they have. They have Torment and Bleed, and they can corrupt others. So I think that having burn on top of all those other ones is really strong. So I would maybe either reduce the duration of the burns, which it wouldn't make it bad, right? Because you would still have really good burst on Condi Scourge. It would just make the overall damage that you do a little bit less, right? Probably a lot less, to be honest. But there's just a little too much damage when you're able to free cast on Condi Scourge, so it makes it too effective in situations where it's good, and it wouldn't make it too much worse in situations where it's kind of okay, because they would just be cleansing it anyways, right? So reducing the duration doesn't reduce the burst, it just reduces it in situations where it's really good, and when they're cleansing it, it wouldn't really do that much anyways in difference. So you would still, we want Condi Scourge to still be viable, but, excuse me, just like smack something, but, yeah, so we want Reaper to be good still, and we want Condi Scourge to be good still, but we don't want them to be too much better than the other one. So we nerf both, and then we nerf Blood Magic, which kind of favors Scourge, to be honest. But actually, it favors both. So let's move on. Mesmer. Let's talk about Mesmer. So Mesmer is really, with the new Chaos build, it's really not fun to play against. Ain't it nerfed the Vigor uptime on Mirage, and that kind of made it a lot more bearable to play against Mesmers because they didn't have their ability to perma dodge. But with Chaos, they gained boon duration and more Vigor, which means they have more dodges and a lot more survivability because of the boon uptime as well. And this just gives Mesmer so much survivability that the amount of damage and burst that they can do with conditions, mind you, conditions, which aren't supposed to be a burst playstyle. So they have survivability, burst conditions, which are also sustained damage, so DPS. It's really a little bit too much. They need to reduce some of the survivability, in my opinion, of Mesmer if they want to have that amount of damage. So I would say just make it so that the Chaos straight line is like unplayable in PvP or something like that. Like, honestly, make it so that Chaos it's not the meta build anymore, so that they don't have this insane amount of boons. Like, boons are just not fun to play against when they're so spammy. Like, there's so many like build diverse Mesmer. Like, Mesmer is very build diverse right now, and that's kind of like goes to show that it's just so broken that you can basically play anything and it'll be good, right? So I think a lot of that has to do with Chaos, maybe, and a lot to do with the, if you're just a Zerk build and you're invuln, you have the same survivability as someone who doesn't have a Zerk Ami, because you're invul anyways. So yeah, maybe reduce the survivability by reducing Chaos to basically nothing. And I would also say that they should probably reduce pistol damage, It's a really good weapon. Like, it has a stun. It's currently the only way that Mesmers get stunned now, I think. Maybe like that Signet, but yeah. Mostly just from pistol you get a stun. So already it's a really good utility weapon, but also the Phantasm gives tons of bleeds at range. And I think that if you want to be doing that amount of damage, you would need to be like something like Axe is kind of okay to me because it's a melee weapon. So while it does insanely like good utility and damage, it is a melee weapon. So you need to be using your dodges while like in range to hit, whereas pistol serves as a filler between your kiting ability, and it gives them too much pressure without any cost to it. Whereas like if you're using axe, you kind of need to be like dodging while using your axe because you're in melee, you're in a dangerous situation. So yeah, reducing pistol would require them to, you know, like I said earlier, you know, reducing damage means reducing survivability in a way, because you need to play more aggressively, or reducing survivability also reduces damage because then you have to go more survivability to kind of not die, and then that suffers on your damage. So, and last but certainly least, we have the Elementalist. Tempest, I'd really like to see Tempest viable in PvP, like as a healer spec, so that, you know, if you want to play support, you're not just playing Guardian only. So I would like to see maybe as like a support option that is a little more aggressive than Firebrand. You can have a Tempest, so they maybe they can make it so when you play Tempest, the auras that you give out have an added bonus to them that gives like might or something. I know there's already a trait that does that, but maybe just, you know, increase it a little more so that Tempest have a little more presence in fights. And then they would definitely need like some kind of like stability or like stun break, because right now to give auras to people with your shouts, you kind of need to go a build that has no stun breaks, because none of the shouts have stun break except the one that doesn't give an aura. So it's kind of like you're losing sustain to gain that survivability, whereas Firebrand just gains all of those passively because it's just part of the class, right? It's part of the tomes. Whereas Tempest, you know, the overloads are a lot less capable, or they're more situational to get that. So making Ellie do a little bit more aggressive potential for his team, and then increasing, I wouldn't say increase its survivability. I would leave its survivability, increase its, you know, ability to make its teammates do damage, and then give it stun breaks. Not necessarily survivability, but stun breaks or stability or something like that. Not too much stability though. And then Tempest would be a little bit closer to Firebrand, and that would be nice. And then we have Weaver, which is another spec that I think should exist, which is a 1v1 spec-ish. You know, Fresh Air, maybe not so fun to play against, so I would leave that where it is, kind of in the dumpster. But the 1v1 Weaver spec could be interesting if it were less uninteractive, so if it was more interactive. So a lot of that has to do with the amount of sustain it has and the amount of dodges it has. And how Weaver 1v1s usually work is it dodges for about a minute until it runs out of cooldowns, and then it instantly dies, right? So I would say increase the cooldown of its skills that give it dodges, so that there are more windows of opportunity for you to do damage to the Ellie, so that they take more pressure while you're trying to get damage on them. So it's not as uninteractive, right? Because Ellie right now is just dodge, then counter pressure a little bit with CC, and like, you know, if they take any damage, then they just kite off. They have like their Water 2 skill and sword just like gives them a really huge heal, which I think is a little bit broken. And then, you know, they just resustain, and they come back in. So like you're forced to kill them instantly, or they just come back, which is not like, it's not interactive, because when you do damage to someone, you want that damage to stick, not just for it to get resustained if you don't get the kill. So it's like it sets up this situation where if you don't have the ability to kill it with excessive force, then you just don't interact with it at all, and you just rotate around it, which, yeah, sure, it's balanced and there's counterplay to it, but it's just not fun, right? So I would give Weaver a lot more interactivity to it. So reduce the evades maybe, or the sustain, and then obviously it would need to be buffed in some other way to keep it viable, right? So maybe I don't know what they would do, but they would need to give it more impact in more than just a 1v1 situation. You know, Elliot is sort of like jack of all trades, so maybe make them a little bit more useful in team fights somehow. I think they're pretty decent still, but yeah, for the most part, that's kind of what I would like to see for balance in 2019, hopefully. Just lower power creep and more interactivity. So that's all.